Hey guys, tonight we're climbing the blood-soaked steps of a Mayan temple at dawn, where you're about to discover why being a priest in ancient Mesoamerica was basically like playing Game of Thrones. Except the stakes were your actual beating heart, and dragons were replaced by feathered serpents who demanded human sacrifice. Picture this. You're standing at the base of a limestone pyramid that stretches nearly 200 feet into the misty jungle canopy. And the only thing between you and divine authority is a treacherous political landscape where one wrong ritual could mean your entrails decorating an altar by sunset. You probably won't survive this if you think being a modern religious leader is challenging. Try balancing cosmic order while dodging obsidian daggers from rival priests who want your jade crown. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're watching. I love seeing our global night owl community come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandaled feet find purchase on stone steps worn smooth by centuries of processions, each one slick with morning dew and the residue of yesterday's ceremonial copal incense. The jade ornaments adorning your elaborate headdress catch the first rays of sunlight filtering through the dense canopy, casting dancing green reflections across the hieroglyph-covered walls that chronicle the rise and fall of kings you've outlasted. Through Par Minutes, you'll discover exactly how Mayan priests became the ultimate political survivors, mastering arts of manipulation that would make modern spin doctors weep with envy. The weight of your feathered serpent collar presses against your shoulders as you ascend, each plume representing a different aspect of divine knowledge you've mastered. Astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and most crucially, the delicate art of reading human nature. Your obsidian blade, ceremonially sharp and polished to mirror perfection, reflects not just your face, but the calculating intelligence that's kept you alive through 3 different royal dynasties. Historians still argue whether Mayan priests held genuine religious conviction or were simply master manipulators using divine authority as political leverage. But you know the truth lies somewhere in the space between faith and survival. The morning air carries the distant sound of conch shell horns announcing the dawn ceremony, but also the subtler whispers of palace intrigue that reach even these sacred heights. You've learned to listen for both the cosmic rhythm of celestial bodies and the earthly rhythm of conspiracy. Your fellow priests move past you in the dim pre-dawn light, their faces painted with red cinnabar and bearing expressions of serene devotion that mask calculations as complex as your astronomical charts. This morning, like every morning for the past 15 years, you're performing a delicate balancing act that would challenge even the most skilled acrobat. On one hand, you must maintain absolute spiritual authority over a population that looks to you for everything from crop predictions to military strategy. On the other, you must navigate the razor-thin political lines between competing noble houses, each one eager to use your divine pronouncements to legitimize their claims to power. Your ceremonial jade earplugs, a mark of your elevated status, filter out the mundane sounds of the awakening city below while allowing you to focus on the sacred responsibilities ahead. But they can't filter out the knowledge that somewhere in the shadowy corridors of the royal palace, nobles are already plotting your downfall, viewing your influence over the king as a threat to their own ambitions. It's a chess game played with human lives, where religious ceremonies become political statements, and every prophecy carries the potential for either elevation or execution. The irony isn't lost on you that while common people view you as a bridge between the earthly and divine realms, you're actually more like a tightrope walker suspended between competing forces of politics, religion, and raw survival instinct. Your extensive training in hieroglyphic writing, mathematical calculations, and astronomical observations serves multiple purposes. Yes, you can predict eclipses and calculate planting seasons, but you can also encode secret messages, manipulate historical records, and create elaborate justifications for whatever political outcome best serves your continued existence. As you reach the temple's summit, the sprawling city of Tikal stretches out below you like a stone testament to Mayan civilization's complexity. Somewhere down there, rival priests from competing temples are performing their own dawn rituals, each one hoping to gain favor with the royal court and perhaps secure the influence you currently wield. The political landscape of Mayan society was never simple. It was a constantly shifting web of alliances, betrayals, and power struggles that made survival an art form requiring equal parts divine inspiration and street-smart cunning. Your morning ritual begins with the lighting of sacred copal incense, the sweet-smelling resin creating clouds of smoke that carry your prayers skyward, while also serving as a signal to political allies throughout the city that you're still alive, still in power, and still worth their continued loyalty. Every gesture you make, every word you speak, every astronomical calculation you announce becomes part of an elaborate performance designed to maintain your position at the intersection of heaven and earth, or at least at the intersection of religious authority and political necessity. The obsidian blade in your hands reflects the flickering torchlight as you prepare for the morning's blood ritual, a ceremony that serves triple duty as religious observance, political theater, and survival strategy all wrapped into one carefully choreographed performance. Your blood, extracted through self-sacrifice rather than from captive, will mingle with cacao beans and maize kernels in a sacred offering that mathematically aligns with Venus's current position. Because in your world, chocolate isn't just a treat. It's literally divine currency that can buy political favor or seal religious authority. The mathematics of sacrifice fascinate you almost as much as they terrify the uninitiated. Each drop of blood must be precisely measured, not just for spiritual efficacy, but because the royal court scribes are watching, calculating, determining whether your offerings demonstrate sufficient devotion to warrant continued royal protection. You've discovered that being slightly more generous with your blood than last month's ceremony increases your political capital, but being too generous suggests desperation, and desperate priests rarely survive the complex maneuvering of Mayan politics. Your astronomical calculations, scratched into bark paper codices that represent years of painstaking observation, reveal that today's Venus conjunction offers a perfect opportunity to make proclamations about the kingdom's future that will either cement your position or destroy it entirely. The mathematical precision required for these predictions would impress modern scientists. Your calculations of planetary cycles, eclipse patterns, and seasonal variations demonstrate an understanding of celestial mechanics that European scholars wouldn't achieve for another 1,000 years. But for you, astronomy isn't academic pursuit, it's political ammunition. The chocolate ceremony begins as you crush cacao beans between your palms, their bitter oils mixing with the metallic scent of your blood in a combination that's both sacred and slightly nauseating. Historians still argue whether the Mayan association of chocolate with divine blood represents genuine spiritual belief or sophisticated marketing designed to increase cacao's political and economic value. But you know that separating religious conviction from practical necessity misses the point entirely. Survival requires both faith and strategy in equal measure. Your morning calculations extend beyond celestial observations to include more earthly concerns. Inventory of temple offerings, tracking of rival priests' activities, analysis of recent royal pronouncements for hidden meanings, and assessment of which noble houses are gaining or losing influence. These mental exercises, performed while publicly focused on sacred ritual, demonstrate the kind of intellectual multitasking that keeps priests alive in a world where divine favor and political reality rarely align as neatly as your mathematical formulas. The cacao beverage you're preparing, a frothy mixture of chocolate, blood, honey, and chili peppers, serves as both communion with the gods and diplomatic tool for the political negotiations that will inevitably follow this morning ceremony. Each ingredient carries symbolic weight. Chocolate represents the earth's fertility. Blood symbolizes human sacrifice and devotion. Honey suggests the sweetness of divine favor, and chili peppers add the fire element that connects earthly rituals to celestial power. But symbolism aside, sharing this sacred drink creates bonds of obligation and mutual dependence that form the backbone of political survival. Your fellow priests move through their own morning rituals with the practiced precision of performers who understand that their lives depend on flawless execution. The younger initiates, those barely past their teens who still believe that religious devotion alone guarantees survival, watch your every movement with a mixture of reverence and anxiety. They haven't yet learned that the most dangerous moment in any priest's career comes not from angry gods, but from ambitious humans who view religious authority as either useful tool or dangerous obstacle. The sacred calendar demands specific offerings on specific days, but your interpretation of those requirements involves careful consideration of current political climate, recent military victories or defeats, and the ever-shifting dynamics of royal favor. Today's ritual calls for prayers to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity associated with wind and rain, but your specific invocations will subtly emphasize themes of stability and continuity. Messages designed to reassure a royal court that's been questioning whether recent military setbacks indicate divine displeasure with current leadership. Your blood offering, made with a stingray spine that pierces your earlobes with practiced precision, creates the crimson drops that will mingle with chocolate and copal smoke in a ceremony that simultaneously honors ancient traditions and serves immediate political needs. The pain keeps you focused, reminds you that survival in this world requires constant sacrifice, not just of blood, but of simple answers, comfortable certainties, and a luxury of pure religious devotion uncontaminated by political necessity. The mathematical precision of your ritual timing aligns with Venus's morning appearance, but also with the royal court's breakfast schedule, ensuring that the smoke from your offering will be visible from the palace windows just as the king begins his daily consultations with advisors who may or may not include your name on today's agenda. Every aspect of your ceremony, from astronomical timing to aromatic intensity, is calculated to maintain your visibility and relevance in a political ecosystem where forgotten priests quickly become dead priests. Your morning prayers, spoken in the sacred dialect that only fully trained priests understand, include coded messages intended for other religious leaders throughout the city, updates on political developments, warnings about potential threats, and subtle negotiations about collective responses to challenges that could affect all of Mayan priesthood. The gods may or may not be listening, but your colleagues certainly are, and their continued cooperation may prove more immediately valuable than divine intervention. As the chocolate and blood mixture froths in the ceremonial gourd, you reflect on the delicate irony that sustains your existence. The more complex and dangerous your political environment becomes, the more essential your religious services appear to the very people who might otherwise eliminate you as a threat. Your ability to interpret divine will, predict astronomical events, and perform rituals that maintain cosmic order makes you simultaneously indispensable and vulnerable, a combination that requires constant vigilance and adaptive strategy. The runner arrives at dawn with news that makes your blood run colder than the morning mist clinging to the temple steps. King Jasa Chan Kawil has fallen to assassins in the night, and his brother Kinich Jenab Pakal claims the throne with backing from the military garrison. You have perhaps 6 hours before the new regime decides whether your religious authority represents continuity and legitimacy or dangerous loyalty to the old order. And your survival depends entirely on how quickly you can pivot your spiritual narrative to support whichever faction emerges victorious. This scenario, playing out with depressing regularity throughout Mayan civilization, represents the ultimate test of priestly adaptability. How to maintain divine authority when the earthly powers you serve keep changing hands through violence, treachery, and political maneuvering that makes religious consistency nearly impossible to maintain. Your 15 years of service to the previous dynasty, including prophecies that legitimized their rule and rituals that celebrated their victories, now become potential evidence of treasonous loyalty to enemies of the new state. Your first tactical decision involves the morning's scheduled ceremony honoring the fallen king's divine connection to the rain god Chak, a ritual that could be interpreted as mourning a beloved ruler or rebellious resistance to new authority, depending entirely on your presentation and the political sympathies of whoever's watching. The mathematical precision of your dilemma would be almost beautiful if it weren't potentially fatal. You must simultaneously demonstrate respect for established religious tradition while signaling acceptance of political change, maintaining spiritual authority while avoiding any appearance of threatening new leadership. The temple's younger priests look to you for guidance, their faces reflecting the terror of realizing that their comfortable world of predictable rituals and steady royal patronage has evaporated overnight. Some of them, particularly those whose families have connections to the old dynasty, are already calculating whether flight to distant cities might offer better survival prospects than attempting to navigate the coming political purge. But you know that running now would confirm suspicions of guilt and ensure that any future Mayan ruler would view you as unreliable, a death sentence for anyone whose authority depends on perceived divine favor. Your strategy begins with a careful re-examination of recent prophecies and their potential alternative interpretations. Last month's prediction of great changes blessed by the storm god could be reframed from a warning about seasonal hurricanes to a divine endorsement of political transformation, while your astronomical calculations suggesting celestial alignment favoring new beginnings suddenly become prophetic validation of the dynastic change rather than references to planting season timing. Historians still argue whether such flexible interpretation represents sophisticated theology or cynical opportunism, but you understand that the distinction is meaningless when survival requires both. The morning ritual proceeds with subtle but significant modifications. Prayers for the deceased king focus on his peaceful transition to the afterlife rather than his earthly accomplishments, while invocations for divine guidance emphasize themes of wisdom, justice, and legitimate authority, qualities that any new ruler would want associated with their regime. Your blood offering, normally made while facing the old dynasty's ancestral shrine, now includes a respectful turn toward the section of the temple complex that houses memorials to earlier rulers, suggesting historical continuity rather than partisan loyalty. Your fellow priests, those wise enough to survive previous dynastic transitions, follow your lead with the practiced skill of political survivors. The senior priest who oversees astronomical calculations subtly adjusts this morning's Venus observations to emphasize renewal and fresh beginnings, while the keeper of the sacred calendar discovers that today's date carries special significance for rulers who achieve power through decisive action. These aren't lies. Exactly. Mayan religious symbolism is complex enough that almost any event can be interpreted multiple ways, depending on which mythological frameworks and mathematical relationships you choose to emphasize. The real test comes when the new king's representatives arrive at the temple complex, their jade ornaments and quetzal feather cloaks marking them as legitimate court officials, but their unfamiliar faces suggesting that political loyalties have shifted dramatically overnight. Your greeting must convey appropriate respect for royal authority while avoiding any suggestion that you view this transition as illegitimate or unexpected. A diplomatic tightrope walk that requires perfect balance between religious dignity and political submission. Your presentation to the new regime's representatives begins with a carefully prepared speech that demonstrates your value as a political asset rather than a threat to stability. You present astronomical calculations showing that recent celestial events actually predicted and blessed the dynastic change. Offer interpretations of ancient prophecies that legitimize the new king's claim to divine favor, and propose modifications to upcoming religious festivals that would celebrate political renewal while maintaining popular traditions that keep the masses content. The negotiation that follows, conducted in the formal diplomatic language that all educated minds understand, but with subtle undertones that only experienced political survivors recognize, establishes the terms of your continued service. You will provide religious legitimacy for the new dynasty in exchange for protection, patronage, and permission to maintain your temple's operations. The agreement, never explicitly stated but clearly understood by all parties, acknowledges that your spiritual authority serves political purposes while your political cooperation serves spiritual ends. Your adaptability during this crisis demonstrates why Mayan priests often outlasted the rulers they served. Religious authority, unlike political power, derives from knowledge and skills that remain valuable regardless of who sits on the throne. Your ability to predict eclipses, calculate agricultural cycles, interpret historical records, and perform rituals that maintain social order make you useful to any regime. While your demonstrated willingness to adapt divine interpretation to political reality proves that you understand the practical limitations of religious authority in a world where gods speak through human intermediaries who have very human needs for survival. The afternoon brings confirmation that your strategy has succeeded, temporarily. The new king's chief advisor announces that your temple will continue receiving royal support. Your astronomical observations will be consulted for state decisions, and your participation in the coronation ceremony will help legitimize the new dynasty's divine right to rule. But the same announcement includes subtle warnings about the consequences of future disloyalty and reminders that royal favor, like divine blessing, can be withdrawn as quickly as it's granted. The stolen codex arrives hidden beneath a merchant's load of cacao beans, its bark paper pages containing astronomical calculations that belong to your rival temple in distant Kalakmul. And you realize with growing alarm that this isn't simple theft, but evidence of an elaborate intelligence network designed to undermine your city's military and political advantages through systematic theft of sacred knowledge. Your mathematical superiority, built through generations of careful observation and calculation, suddenly becomes a vulnerability as competing city-states deploy organized espionage against the intellectual foundations of Mayan power. The implications hit you like an obsidian blade between the shoulder blades. If Kalakmul has access to your eclipse predictions, crop cycle calculations, and seasonal warfare timing, they can anticipate and counter your city's strategic advantages while potentially using your own astronomical knowledge to legitimize their attacks as divinely ordained. Worse, the codex contains mathematical errors that suggest your rivals are deliberately spreading corrupted information, hoping to sabotage your calculations and undermine your reputation when your predictions inevitably fail. Your investigation into the theft reveals a network of corruption that extends from lowly temple scribes to high-ranking noble houses with secret loyalties to foreign cities. The mathematics of betrayal prove surprisingly complex. Each stolen calculation represents not just lost intellectual property, but compromised strategic intelligence that could determine the outcome of future military campaigns, trade negotiations, and political alliances. Your role as keeper of sacred knowledge suddenly transforms into that of counterintelligence operative protecting state secrets disguised as religious doctrine. The stolen astronomical tables, decoded through painstaking analysis of their mathematical structure, reveal that Kalakmul's priests have been systematically collecting information about your city's military planning cycles, agricultural predictions, and ceremonial schedules. Intelligence that would allow them to time attacks for maximum strategic advantage while avoiding periods when your defenders expect conflict. The sophistication of their operation suggests coordination at the highest levels of their religious and political hierarchies, making this not just intellectual theft, but an act of war disguised as scholarly exchange. Your counter-strategy begins with the creation of false codices containing deliberately incorrect astronomical calculations, mathematical formulas that will produce predictions just wrong enough to embarrass rival priests, while not being obviously fraudulent to casual examination. These counterintelligence documents, prepared with the same attention to detail as genuine sacred texts, will be strategically placed where enemy agents can steal them, feeding corrupted information back to hostile cities and undermining their confidence in stolen knowledge. The network of temple scribes under your supervision suddenly becomes a security concern requiring careful vetting and constant surveillance. You implement new protocols for handling sensitive calculations, create compartmentalized information systems that prevent any single individual from accessing complete astronomical data, and establish coded communication methods that allow legitimate scholars to share knowledge while excluding potential spies. These measures, revolutionary for their time, essentially create the first known examples of information security practices in the ancient Americas. Your fellow priests, initially skeptical of your paranoid-seeming security measures, become believers when intercepted messages reveal that rival cities have been coordinating their intelligence-gathering efforts, sharing stolen information, and potentially planning coordinated attacks based on compromised astronomical calculations. The realization that religious knowledge represents military intelligence transforms your temple from scholarly sanctuary to strategic command center, requiring constant vigilance against infiltration and sabotage. The mathematical complexity of maintaining multiple versions of truth, accurate calculations for internal use, modified versions for general distribution, and deliberately false information for enemy consumption challenges even your sophisticated understanding of astronomical relationships. You must remember which calculations are genuine, which are modified for security purposes, and which are entirely fabricated for counterintelligence purposes, all while maintaining the appearance of consistent religious authority and mathematical precision. Your diplomatic contacts in neutral cities begin reporting unusual patterns of information requests from traditional rivals, suggesting that the Codex Wars have expanded beyond simple bilateral theft to include systematic efforts to collect intelligence about multiple city-states simultaneously. The scope of these operations indicates coordination at levels that threaten the entire balance of power throughout the Mayan world, making your local security concerns part of a broader struggle for intellectual and strategic supremacy. Historians still argue whether the Codex Wars represent genuine religious competition or purely political espionage disguised as scholarly activity. But you understand that the distinction is meaningless when sacred knowledge and state security are inseparably intertwined. Your astronomical calculations serve simultaneously as religious doctrine, agricultural guidance, military intelligence, and diplomatic leverage, making their protection essential for survival at personal, institutional, and civilizational levels. The establishment of secure communication networks between allied temples creates the first known information-sharing protocols designed to exclude hostile parties while maintaining scholarly cooperation. Your coded messages, hidden within routine religious correspondence, coordinate defensive measures, share intelligence about enemy activities, and establish mutual support agreements that transform individual temples into nodes in a broader security network designed to protect collective intellectual assets. Your young scribes, initially trained only in mathematical calculation and hieroglyphic writing, now receive additional instruction in information security, counter-surveillance techniques, and the identification of potential infiltrators. These skills, unprecedented in traditional priestly education, reflect the evolution of religious authority in response to systematic intellectual warfare that threatens the foundations of temple-based political power throughout Mesoamerica. The morning's ritual, normally focused on purely spiritual concerns, now includes prayers for protection against enemies who steal rather than fight, invocations for divine guidance and preserving sacred knowledge, and offerings designed to maintain the favor of gods who presumably disapprove of intellectual theft disguised as religious scholarship. Your blood sacrifice, drawn with unusual precision this morning, mingles with copal smoke in ceremonies that serve simultaneously as worship, security briefing, and psychological preparation for ongoing intellectual warfare. You stand in the ceremonial plaza where your people once danced to celebrate abundant harvests, but now the cracked earth beneath your feet tells a different story. The rains have failed for 3 consecutive seasons, and you must somehow adapt ancient rituals to address a climate catastrophe that threatens everything your civilization has built. The drought that's reshaping your world would challenge any leader. But as a priest king whose authority depends on maintaining divine favor, you face the additional burden of explaining why the gods have apparently abandoned the very people you've sworn to protect. The mathematical precision that served you so well in predicting eclipses and planning ceremonial calendars now reveals the terrifying scope of your climate crisis. Your astronomical observations track not just celestial cycles, but weather patterns that extend across decades and centuries, and the data suggests this drought represents part of a larger climatic shift that could last for generations. The tree ring samples your agents collect from ancient Cecropia groves confirm your worst fears. Similar dry periods in the past led to the abandonment of entire cities and the collapse of bloodlines that had ruled for hundreds of years. Your ritual adaptations began with subtle modifications to traditional rain ceremonies, increasing the frequency of bloodletting sacrifices while adding new elements designed to demonstrate more desperate appeals for divine intervention. Where your ancestors offered drops of blood from tongue and earlobes, you now organize community-wide ceremonies involving more elaborate personal sacrifice. The escalation serves multiple purposes, showing the gods that your people take their displeasure seriously while providing psychological outlets for a population facing starvation. The political implications of prolonged drought create challenges that would test any leadership system. Hungry people question religious authority more readily than well-fed citizens, and rival priest kings from regions less affected by the climate crisis send agents to exploit your people's desperation. They spread rumors that your bloodline has lost divine favor, that traditional rituals are no longer effective, and that perhaps it's time for new leadership blessed with more powerful connections to the celestial forces that control rainfall. Your response involves theological innovations that walk a careful line between admitting the severity of your situation and maintaining the religious authority necessary for effective leadership. You begin teaching that the drought represents a cosmic test designed to strengthen your people's spiritual resolve, that the gods are deliberately creating hardship to separate the truly faithful from those whose devotion wavers during difficult times. This narrative allows you to acknowledge reality while framing suffering as a pathway to greater divine favor. The agricultural adaptations you're implementing showcase Maya engineering capabilities that would impress modern environmental scientists. Your city's elaborate canal system is being modified to capture and store every drop of water that falls during brief rain showers, while new terracing projects extend cultivation into marginal lands that previous generations left untouched. The construction projects serve double duty, providing practical drought mitigation while creating employment for people who might otherwise turn to banditry or rebellion. Your most innovative ritual adaptation involves incorporating water conservation into religious ceremony in ways that make practical resource management appear to be sacred activity. New prayers emphasize careful stewardship of divine gifts, while ceremonial protocols require participants to demonstrate their reverence for water through precise, minimalist usage during religious activities. These changes help reduce consumption while reinforcing the spiritual significance of resources that your people now understand they can't take for granted. The psychological dimensions of drought management require careful attention to maintaining community morale during a crisis that could easily spiral into social collapse. Your storytellers adapt traditional myths to emphasize themes of endurance and divine testing, while your artists create new works that celebrate the beauty of desert landscapes and the spiritual power that emerges from material hardship. The cultural innovations help your people find meaning in suffering rather than simply viewing their situation as evidence of divine abandonment. Your intelligence networks report that other Maya cities are experiencing similar climate pressures, but with varying degrees of success in managing the crisis. Some communities have already been abandoned as their populations migrated toward regions with more reliable water sources, while others have adapted through technological innovations or political alliances that provide access to resources from less affected areas. This information helps you evaluate which survival strategies might work in your specific situation. The trade relationships that once brought luxury goods to your city now focus primarily on securing basic survival resources. Cacao beans and jade ornaments that would have purchased elaborate featherwork or ceremonial pottery now buy grain and preserved meat from highland communities whose agricultural systems remain productive despite the changing climate. Your merchants report that the traditional Maya economy is being transformed as communities prioritize practical necessities over the prestige goods that once defined inter-city relationships. Your most difficult adaptation involves modifying human sacrifice practices to address drought conditions without completely abandoning traditions that your people consider essential for maintaining cosmic balance. The traditional ceremonies that involved throwing precious objects and occasionally human victims into sacred cenotes now focus more heavily on blood offerings and symbolic sacrifices that achieve religious goals without depleting your community's human resources during a period when every person's labor is needed for survival. The astronomical knowledge that once enhanced your authority through eclipse predictions now serves more practical purposes as you track weather patterns and seasonal changes with mathematical precision that helps your people optimize their agricultural efforts. Your calculations identify optimal planting times for drought-resistant crops, predict brief windows when water supplies might be replenished, and coordinate community activities to maximize resource efficiency during critical survival periods. Your greatest fear isn't that the drought will continue indefinitely, but that social pressures will trigger internal conflicts that destroy your community before natural conditions improve. Historians still argue whether Maya civilization's classic period ended primarily due to climate change or political instability, but you've seen how quickly environmental stress can transform manageable disagreements into violent confrontations that tear communities apart from within. The religious innovations you're developing may outlast the immediate crisis that inspired them, creating new theological traditions that future generations will inherit along with whatever environmental challenges await them. Your teachings about finding spiritual strength through material hardship, your emphasis on resource conservation as sacred duty, and your integration of practical survival skills with traditional ceremonial practices represent adaptations that could serve your people well regardless of what climatic conditions the future might bring. As the sun sets over your drought-stricken city, you climb once again to your highest observatory platform, where the mathematical instruments and astronomical charts that once predicted celestial events now serve as tools for tracking weather patterns and planning survival strategies. The drought that changed everything has transformed you from a priest-king whose primary concern was managing political rivalries into a leader whose daily decisions determine whether your people live or die, whether your bloodline continues or joins the growing list of royal families whose authority couldn't survive the collision between divine ambition and environmental reality. You stand at the edge of the ceremonial ball court, watching as your newest war captive, a young priest-king from a city that dared to challenge your authority, prepares for the sacred game that will determine not just his fate, but the spiritual balance between your competing bloodlines. The rubber ball bouncing off stone walls carries more weight than its physical mass suggests, as you've learned to transform military defeats into religious victories through ritual competitions that turn political humiliation into divine theater. The war captives kneeling in jade-adorned chains around the court's perimeter represent more than simple military trophies. They're valuable political assets whose strategic deployment could strengthen your authority for generations. Your approach to prisoner management would impress modern hostage negotiators, as you've developed systems that convert captured enemies into loyal allies, while simultaneously demonstrating your power to rival city-states who might consider challenging your dominance. The sacred ball game you're orchestrating serves multiple purposes that extend far beyond entertainment or religious ceremony. The ritualized competition allows you to display captured nobility in ways that humiliate their home cities, while providing opportunities for diplomatic negotiations that could prevent future warfare. The complex rules governing who plays, who watches, and who survives create a political theater where life and death decisions appear to result from divine intervention rather than calculated strategic choices. Your prisoner exchange networks operate like sophisticated diplomatic systems that would challenge contemporary international negotiators. The captured priest king currently preparing for today's ball game represents the culmination of a complex series of political moves involving 3 different city-states, 2 marriage alliances, and a trade dispute over cacao bean quality standards. His presence in your court creates leverage that could be used to secure favorable treaties, obtain valuable intelligence, or simply demonstrate your military capabilities to potential rivals. The training programs you've established for war captives showcase Maya approaches to psychological warfare that combine genuine religious instruction with calculated political indoctrination. Captured nobles spend months learning your city's particular version of astronomical mathematics, ceremonial protocols, and theological interpretations that subtly emphasize your bloodline's superior divine connections. This education serves as both genuine cultural exchange and sophisticated brainwashing that can convert enemies into advocates for your political interests. Your most successful prisoner conversion involved a young warrior priest whose home city had raided your tribute collectors during the previous dry season. Rather than simply executing him as traditional protocol would have demanded, you assigned him to study under your master astronomers while gradually revealing the mathematical sophistication that underlies your religious authority. The young man's growing appreciation for your intellectual achievements eventually transformed him into a genuine supporter who now serves as an ambassador promoting peaceful relationships between formerly hostile communities. The ball game rituals themselves demonstrate the intersection of sport, religion, and politics in ways that modern observers often fail to fully appreciate. The courts where these competitions occur represent cosmic battlefields where the fundamental forces of creation and destruction play out through human proxies. Your role as the ultimate authority who determines game rules, participant selection, and outcome interpretation makes you a living representative of divine justice, whose decisions carry supernatural as well as political significance. The strategic prisoner exchanges you negotiate require careful attention to maintaining balance between multiple competing interests. Releasing valuable captives too readily might signal weakness that encourages future attacks, while holding prisoners too long could provoke rescue attempts or revenge raids that destabilize regional politics. Your scribes maintain detailed records tracking the political value of different captives, their potential usefulness in various diplomatic scenarios, and the optimal timing for different types of prisoner releases. Your most complex prisoner situation involves a group of captured astronomers whose mathematical knowledge rivals your own calculations, but whose loyalty remains questionable despite months of careful indoctrination. These scholars represent both valuable intellectual resources and potential security threats, as their expertise could significantly enhance rival cities' religious authority if they were to escape or be rescued. You've assigned them to collaborative research projects that provide access to advanced mathematical concepts while ensuring they remain under constant surveillance. The psychological dimensions of captive management require understanding how different personality types respond to various combinations of intimidation, incentive, and intellectual challenge. Some prisoners respond well to demonstrations of your military power and the futility of resistance, while others are more effectively converted through exposure to your city's cultural achievements and opportunities for personal advancement. Your most skilled interrogators can evaluate captured enemies and recommend optimal approaches for securing their cooperation or extracting valuable intelligence. The religious aspects of prisoner treatment involve theological questions about the spiritual status of captured enemies and their potential for redemption through proper ritual participation. Your priests debate whether war captives retain their original divine connections or acquire new spiritual characteristics through exposure to your city's particular religious practices. These discussions influence decisions about which prisoners are suitable for sacrifice, which might be converted into loyal servants, and which should be returned to their home cities as part of diplomatic agreements. Your ball court ceremonies create spectacles that reinforce your authority while providing entertainment that helps maintain public morale during difficult periods. The combination of athletic competition, religious ritual, and political theater draws crowds from throughout your territory, creating opportunities for tax collection, trade fair activities, and social gatherings that strengthen community bonds. The events also serve as intelligence gathering opportunities, as visiting merchants and pilgrims often carry information about conditions in other cities. The prisoner release ceremonies you've developed showcase your magnanimity while simultaneously demonstrating your power over life and death. Former captives who return to their home cities carry detailed accounts of your military capabilities, religious sophistication, and fair treatment of defeated enemies. This reputation for honorable conduct encourages rival leaders to consider negotiated settlements rather than risking the potential consequences of military defeat and subsequent captivity. Your most innovative approach to prisoner management involves creating competitive dynamics between different groups of captives that encourage them to demonstrate loyalty to your interests in hopes of earning favorable treatment. The captured priest king currently preparing for today's ball game knows that his performance will be evaluated not just on athletic skill, but on his apparent acceptance of your religious authority and his willingness to acknowledge your superior divine connections. The intelligence value of war captives extends beyond immediate military information to include detailed knowledge about rival cities' economic resources, political alliances, religious practices, and technological capabilities. Your interrogation specialists use techniques that would impress modern intelligence agencies, combining patient relationship building with strategic psychological pressure to extract information that helps you prepare for future conflicts or identify opportunities for profitable diplomatic relationships. Your greatest success in transforming military victory into long-term political advantage involved a campaign against a coalition of 3 smaller cities that had been disrupting your trade routes. Rather than simply destroying the defeated communities, you captured their leadership and used extended ball game ceremonies to negotiate a comprehensive peace agreement that converted former enemies into tributary allies. The settlement has provided years of stable tribute payments while eliminating potential military threats from that region. As today's sacred ball game reaches its climax, you reflect on how the ritualized competition unfolding before you represents the broader strategic principles that have enabled your survival in Maya political warfare. The war captive whose fate hangs in the balance embodies both the dangers and opportunities that define leadership in your world. Every enemy defeated creates new possibilities for alliance building. Every prisoner captured offers chances for intelligence gathering. And every ball game played reinforces the religious authority that transforms mere military success into lasting political power. You hear the sound before you see them. Metal clanking against metal in rhythms that no Maya craftsman has ever produced. And you know that the bearded strangers approaching your city represent either the greatest opportunity or the most catastrophic threat your bloodline has ever faced. The Spanish conquistadors riding their impossible 4-legged beasts carry weapons that can shatter obsidian blades, diseases that kill without visible wounds, and religious ideas that challenge the very foundations of the divine authority your family has maintained for centuries. The first European you encounter face-to-face is a priest whose black robes seem to absorb sunlight while his pale skin reflects it like polished jade. He speaks through an interpreter, a Maya woman whose story you recognize as one of survival and adaptation that mirrors your own political challenges, and his words carry implications that make your blood run cold. He claims to represent a god whose power extends across vast oceans, whose followers have conquered cities larger than any in your world, and whose spiritual authority supposedly supersedes all local religious traditions. Your initial response combines diplomatic caution with strategic intelligence gathering that would make your spy networks proud. You welcome the strangers with ceremonies designed to demonstrate your wealth and sophistication while carefully observing their reactions to different aspects of Maya culture. The metal-clad warriors show obvious interest in your jade ornaments and gold decorations, while their religious leader focuses intently on your astronomical instruments and mathematical calculations with an attention that suggests genuine intellectual appreciation. The Spanish steel meets Mayan stone in your first serious confrontation when the conquistadors demand that you abandon traditional religious practices and submit to their foreign god's authority. The theological challenge they present is unlike anything your people have previously encountered. Not a request for political alliance or tribute arrangement, but a complete rejection of the religious foundations that legitimize your entire civilization. Their priest claims that your astronomical knowledge represents demonic influences, that your bloodletting rituals constitute devil worship, and that your mathematical achievements mean nothing compared to European spiritual authority. Your response requires diplomatic skills that blend traditional Maya political strategies with unprecedented adaptation to circumstances no previous ruler could have imagined. You cannot simply reject the Spanish demands without risking military confrontation that your weapons and tactics are unlikely to win. But you also cannot abandon the religious practices that form the foundation of your political authority without destroying your credibility among your own people. The solution you develop involves creating multiple layers of apparent compliance that mask continued traditional practice in ways the Spanish cannot easily detect. You publicly participate in their religious ceremonies while privately maintaining the bloodletting rituals and astronomical observations that your people expect from legitimate spiritual leadership. This requires acting skills that would challenge professional performers, as you must appear genuinely converted while secretly preserving the cultural knowledge that defines Maya civilization. Your most successful deception involves reframing traditional Maya religious concepts in Spanish Catholic terminology that satisfies European expectations while maintaining authentic spiritual meaning for your people. The feathered serpent becomes associated with Christian saints. Astronomical observations are described as natural philosophy rather than divine communication, and traditional ceremonies are modified to resemble Catholic rituals while preserving their essential religious functions. The disease outbreaks that accompany Spanish arrival create humanitarian crises that test your leadership capabilities in ways no amount of political experience could have prepared you for. European pathogens kill your people in numbers that make warfare seem insignificant by comparison, and traditional healing practices prove helpless against illnesses that your shamans have never encountered. You must somehow maintain religious authority while acknowledging that your spiritual powers cannot protect your people from threats that European presence has introduced. Your adaptation strategy involves selectively incorporating Spanish medical knowledge while maintaining Maya healing traditions that continue to prove effective for familiar ailments. You assign your most trusted priest to study European approaches to disease treatment, not because you believe Spanish methods are superior, but because survival requires learning from any source that might help your people endure this unprecedented catastrophe. The political implications of Spanish colonization create dilemmas that force you to choose between preserving your immediate authority and ensuring your culture's long-term survival. Collaborating too closely with conquistadors could provide short-term protection for your city while ultimately facilitating the destruction of Maya civilization. But resisting Spanish control too openly might trigger military responses that would annihilate your people entirely. Your intelligence networks report that different Maya cities are pursuing various survival strategies with mixed results. Some communities have attempted military resistance that ended in complete destruction, while others have embraced Spanish authority so enthusiastically that their traditional cultures are disappearing within single generations. You need to find a middle path that provides enough cooperation to ensure survival, while maintaining enough traditional practice to preserve the knowledge systems that define your people's identity. The Spanish priest who serves as your primary European contact demonstrates intellectual curiosity about Maya achievements that provides opportunities for cultural preservation disguised as educational exchange. You share astronomical calculations and mathematical innovations while carefully avoiding any information that might help conquistadors exploit your people more effectively. The relationship allows you to maintain some scholarly dignity while gathering intelligence about European capabilities and intentions. Your most dangerous moment comes when Spanish authorities discover evidence of continued traditional religious practice despite your public conversion to Christianity. The confrontation requires all your diplomatic skills as you explain the cultural artifacts and ceremonial materials as historical curiosities rather than active religious implements. The success of your deception depends on your ability to convince European observers that you've genuinely abandoned traditional beliefs while maintaining credibility among your own people who know better. Historians still argue whether Maya leaders who collaborated with Spanish colonizers were pragmatic survivors or cultural traitors. But you've learned that survival in impossible circumstances requires moral flexibility that peacetime leadership never demands. Every decision involves choosing between competing values: immediate safety versus long-term cultural preservation, personal survival versus community welfare, political adaptation versus religious authenticity. Your greatest innovation involves creating educational programs that teach young Maya people European languages and customs, while secretly preserving traditional knowledge through coded instruction that Spanish observers cannot recognize. The children who participate in these programs will become the generation that carries Maya's civilization into whatever future emerges from the collision between European colonization and indigenous resistance. The transformation you're witnessing extends beyond simple political conquest to represent a fundamental challenge to human cultural diversity itself. The Spanish system demands not just political submission, but complete cultural conversion that would eliminate Maya achievements in astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and religious philosophy. Your resistance involves preserving intellectual traditions that represent thousands of years of accumulated human knowledge. As you watch Spanish soldiers patrol your ceremonial plaza, where Maya priests once performed rituals that connected earthly politics with cosmic forces, you realize that your survival as a leader now depends less on managing traditional political rivalries than on protecting the cultural knowledge that defines your people's contribution to human civilization. The steel and stone confrontation unfolding around you represents more than military conquest. It's a battle for the right of indigenous cultures to continue existing in a world increasingly dominated by European colonial ambitions. You kneel in the hidden chamber 3 levels beneath your city's main temple, where flickering copal torches illuminate sacred texts that Spanish authorities believe they successfully destroyed months ago. And you realize that preserving Maya knowledge now requires clandestine networks more sophisticated than any spy system you've ever operated. The underground temples you're constructing represent more than mere hiding places. They're the foundation of a cultural resistance movement that must somehow maintain ancient wisdom while operating under the constant threat of discovery by colonial authorities. The Spanish bishop who governs your region with increasing suspicion has issued proclamations requiring all Maya books to be surrendered for examination and probable destruction, claiming that indigenous manuscripts contain demonic influences that threaten Christian souls. Your public compliance with this order involved delivering carefully selected texts whose loss wouldn't significantly damage Maya intellectual traditions, while your private resistance has focused on creating hidden libraries that preserve the mathematical, astronomical, and historical knowledge that defines your civilization. Your network of underground preservation sites extends throughout the territory you once controlled through traditional political authority, but now operates as a secret society whose members communicate through coded symbols that Spanish observers mistake for decorative patterns. The jade ornaments your people, where carry mathematical formulas encoded in their carved designs, while textile patterns preserve astronomical calculations and religious instructions that can be transmitted across generations without creating written documents that colonial authorities might discover and destroy. The most dangerous aspect of your preservation efforts involves training new generations of Maya scholars who must master traditional knowledge while appearing to embrace Spanish educational priorities. The young people you're instructing spend their days learning Catholic doctrine and European languages in mission schools, then gather secretly at night to study astronomical mathematics and religious philosophy that represent thousands of years of indigenous intellectual achievement. Your hidden texts include chronicles that record Maya political history, mathematical treatises that explain calendar calculations, astronomical observations that track celestial cycles, and religious instructions that preserve the theological knowledge necessary for authentic ceremonial practice. These manuscripts represent irreplaceable cultural treasures whose destruction would eliminate entire categories of human knowledge that took centuries to develop and refine. The preservation techniques you're employing showcase Maya technological sophistication that continues even under colonial suppression. The bark paper and mineral pigments used in traditional book production resist humidity and insect damage better than European materials, while the mathematical notation systems your scribes developed allow complex information to be recorded more efficiently than Spanish alphabetic writing. Your hidden libraries utilize architectural principles that protect documents from both natural deterioration and human discovery. Your most trusted collaborators include craftspeople whose traditional skills provide perfect cover for resistance activities. The sculptors who carve religious decorations for Spanish churches embed traditional Maya symbols in their work, preserving sacred imagery while satisfying colonial expectations for Christian art. The architects who construct colonial buildings incorporate geometric principles derived from traditional Maya mathematics, ensuring that indigenous knowledge continues to influence regional construction practices. The communication systems you've developed for coordinating preservation activities rely on existing social networks that Spanish authorities haven't yet learned to monitor effectively. Market vendors who travel between different communities carry encoded messages along with their trade goods, while pilgrims visiting officially sanctioned Catholic shrines serve as couriers for information about hidden manuscript locations and security threats to preservation sites. Your psychological challenges involve maintaining hope and purpose among people whose cultural world is being systematically destroyed by colonial policies. Many Maya scholars have fallen into despair as they witness the burning of libraries that contain knowledge their families have preserved for generations, while others have embraced European culture so completely that they've lost interest in maintaining traditional intellectual traditions. The theological dimensions of your resistance work require careful navigation between authentic Maya religious practice and the appearance of Catholic orthodoxy that Spanish authorities demand. Your underground ceremonies blend traditional bloodletting rituals with Christian symbolism in ways that satisfy both indigenous spiritual needs and colonial surveillance requirements. The theological innovations you're developing may eventually influence how Maya culture adapts to permanent European presence. Your most successful preservation project involves creating comprehensive copies of astronomical tables that track planetary movements and eclipse predictions across multiple centuries. These mathematical treasures represent Maya intellectual achievements that rival anything produced by European scholars, but they must be hidden from Spanish authorities who would view such sophisticated astronomical knowledge as evidence of continued pagan religious practice. The security measures protecting your underground operations include early warning systems that can alert preservation sites about approaching Spanish inspections, alternative storage locations that provide backup protection for particularly valuable manuscripts, and cover stories that explain suspicious activities in ways that satisfy colonial investigators. Your network operates with compartmentalized knowledge systems that limit the damage any single discovery or betrayal could cause. Your greatest fear involves the possibility that younger generations will lose interest in traditional knowledge as they become increasingly integrated into Spanish colonial society. The children who grow up under European cultural influence may decide that Maya intellectual traditions are irrelevant to their future success, leaving your preservation efforts without successors capable of maintaining the cultural knowledge you're working so desperately to protect. The economic dimensions of your resistance activities require funding sources that don't attract colonial attention to your preservation work. You've established trade relationships that generate revenue for purchasing preservation materials and supporting resistance participants, while carefully avoiding any activities that might signal the existence of organized indigenous political opposition to Spanish authority. Your intelligence gathering about Spanish colonial policies helps you anticipate new threats to Maya cultural preservation while identifying opportunities for expanding your resistance networks. You monitor colonial administrative decisions, track the movements of religious authorities who might investigate traditional practice, and maintain relationships with sympathetic Europeans whose assistance could prove crucial during emergencies. The documentation projects you're coordinating extend beyond simply preserving existing texts to include creating new records that capture contemporary Maya experiences under colonial rule. Future generations will need to understand not just traditional Maya knowledge, but also the strategies their ancestors used to survive cultural suppression and maintain indigenous identity under European domination. Your most ambitious preservation effort involves creating a comprehensive archive that brings together mathematical, astronomical, historical, and religious knowledge from multiple Maya cities whose libraries have been scattered or destroyed by colonial authorities. This project requires coordinating with surviving scholars from across the region while maintaining the security protocols necessary to prevent Spanish discovery of your activities. As you extinguish the copal torches and seal the entrance to tonight's underground preservation session, you reflect on how the hidden texts surrounding you represent more than simple cultural artifacts. They embody the intellectual achievements that distinguish Maya civilization and demonstrate your people's sophisticated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and human spiritual development. The clandestine networks you've built to protect this knowledge may prove more important than any political alliance you forged during the era when Maya priest-kings ruled openly rather than operating as cultural resistance leaders in a world increasingly dominated by European colonial authority. You stand at the edge of a jungle clearing where your newest students practice bloodletting techniques that their grandchildren will need to remember if Maya's spiritual traditions are to survive another generation of colonial suppression. Knowing that the remote sanctuary you've established represents perhaps the last place where ancient wisdom can be transmitted without interference from Spanish authorities or the cultural amnesia that threatens to erase indigenous knowledge entirely. The young people gathered around the sacred fire include refugees from multiple cities whose traditional religious hierarchies have been destroyed by European colonization, creating a community of cultural survivors whose diverse backgrounds actually strengthen the comprehensive preservation program you're developing. These aren't just students learning historical curiosities, but the last true believers whose dedication to maintaining Maya's spiritual practices could determine whether your civilization's intellectual achievements persist or disappear entirely. Your training programs combine traditional educational methods with innovations designed to address the unique challenges facing indigenous culture under colonial rule. Students must master not only astronomical calculations and religious ceremonies, but also the psychological resilience necessary for maintaining authentic spiritual practice while living in a world that increasingly views such knowledge as primitive superstition or dangerous paganism. The jungle location you've selected for this final preservation effort provides natural security advantages that complement the human precautions necessary for avoiding Spanish detection. The dense vegetation conceals architectural features that might attract colonial attention, while the remote location discourages casual visitors who could accidentally discover your educational activities. Yet the site remains accessible enough for essential supplies and communication with other resistance networks. Your curriculum includes mathematical instruction that demonstrates Maya intellectual achievements rival anything produced by European scholars. Students learn to calculate eclipse predictions, track planetary movements, and coordinate complex calendar systems that require sophisticated understanding of astronomical phenomena. These skills provide practical benefits for agricultural planning and ceremonial scheduling while maintaining the intellectual traditions that distinguish Maya civilization. The religious training you provide emphasizes authentic ceremonial practice rather than the syncretistic adaptations that many colonial-era Maya communities have adopted for survival purposes. Your students learn traditional bloodletting techniques, genuine meditation practices, and theological concepts that preserve the spiritual insights your ancestors developed through centuries of religious experimentation and philosophical investigation. Your most challenging educational responsibility involves preparing students for leadership roles in communities where they cannot openly acknowledge their training or explicitly practice traditional religious methods. These future cultural leaders must learn to maintain Maya spiritual perspectives while operating within Spanish colonial society, preserving indigenous wisdom through subtle influence rather than direct instruction. The historical knowledge you're transmitting includes not just Maya achievements, but also detailed analysis of Spanish colonial strategies and their effectiveness in different circumstances. Your students need to understand European political methods, religious motivations, and cultural assumptions if they're going to successfully navigate colonial society while secretly maintaining traditional practices. Your preservation methods extend beyond simple instruction to include creating redundant knowledge storage systems that can survive various types of disasters or discoveries. Multiple students learn identical information, while written materials are copied and distributed to different locations that provide backup protection against loss or destruction of any single archive. The psychological preparation your students receive addresses the emotional challenges of maintaining cultural identity while living as a suppressed minority in their own homeland. Many struggle with anger about the destruction of Maya political independence, grief over the loss of family members to European diseases, and fear about the future survival of indigenous culture under increasingly oppressive colonial policies. Your most successful graduates have established their own small preservation networks and communities throughout the region, creating a distributed system of cultural maintenance that reduces dependence on any single location or leadership group. These secondary networks ensure that Mayan knowledge will persist even if Spanish authorities discover and destroy your primary training facility. The collaboration you've developed with other indigenous groups facing similar cultural suppression provides mutual support and shared strategic insights that strengthen everyone's resistance efforts. You exchange preservation techniques with Aztec scholars who survived Spanish conquest in central Mexico, while maintaining communication with Maya communities in more remote regions where traditional practices continue with less colonial interference. Your intelligence gathering about Spanish colonial policies helps you anticipate new threats while identifying opportunities for expanding cultural preservation work. You monitor religious administrative decisions, track the activities of colonial officials who might investigate indigenous educational programs, and maintain relationships with sympathetic individuals whose assistance could prove crucial during emergencies. The documentation projects coordinated from your jungle sanctuary include creating comprehensive records of traditional Maya knowledge that can be transmitted to future generations regardless of what political circumstances they might face. These archives preserve not just ancient wisdom, but also contemporary strategies for cultural survival under colonial domination. Your greatest achievement involves training a generation of cultural carriers who understand both traditional Maya knowledge and Spanish colonial society well enough to maintain indigenous spiritual practices while participating successfully in European-dominated economic and political systems. These individuals represent the bridge between Maya civilization's classical achievements and whatever form indigenous culture might take in the colonial future. The security protocols protecting your sanctuary include early warning systems, evacuation procedures, and cover stories that can explain suspicious activities if Spanish authorities eventually discover your location. Your students learn operational security methods that will serve them throughout their lives as they work to maintain Maya culture in hostile environments. Your most difficult decisions involve determining which aspects of traditional practice are essential for cultural survival and which can be modified or abandoned if necessary for security purposes. Some religious ceremonies require materials or locations that colonial authorities monitor closely, while certain mathematical knowledge might be too obviously sophisticated to maintain without attracting unwanted attention from Spanish scholars. The emotional cost of your preservation work weighs heavily during quiet moments between teaching sessions. Many of your students represent the last members of noble families whose political authority was destroyed by Spanish conquest, while others are survivors of communities that were completely eliminated by European diseases or military action. Their dedication to learning traditional knowledge despite personal losses demonstrates the spiritual resilience that has enabled Maya civilization to survive existential threats. Your final lesson for each graduating class emphasizes that their role extends beyond simply preserving ancient knowledge to include adapting Maya wisdom for contemporary circumstances. The intellectual traditions they're inheriting must evolve to address new challenges while maintaining the essential insights that distinguish indigenous spiritual understanding from European religious approaches. As you watch your newest students master the mathematical calculations necessary for eclipse prediction, while Spanish colonial authorities remain unaware that sophisticated astronomical knowledge continues to flourish in the jungle depths they consider worthless wilderness, you realize that the last true believers surrounding you represent both an ending and a beginning. The conclusion of Maya civilization's classical political independence and the foundation of whatever form indigenous culture will take as it adapts to permanent European presence in the Americas. You watch from the shadows of eternity as archaeologists carefully brush centuries of accumulated earth from the hidden chamber where you once taught the final generation of traditional Maya priests, and you realize that the sophisticated survival strategies you perfected during humanity's most challenging cultural transitions have created a legacy that modern scholars are only beginning to understand. The echoes resonating through these ancient ruins carry forward the accumulated wisdom of bloodlines that learn to adapt, preserve, and endure through political upheavals that would have destroyed less resilient civilizations. The modern researchers examining your underground preservation sites demonstrate the same mathematical precision and careful observation skills that characterized Maya intellectual traditions, though they're using electronic instruments instead of jade-calibrated astronomical devices and carbon dating instead of calendar calculations to unlock the secrets your people embedded in stone and earth. Their discoveries reveal survival strategies so sophisticated that contemporary political scientists study Maya adaptation techniques for insights into how cultures can maintain essential identity while navigating existential threats. Your spy networks have evolved into archaeological methodologies that track information flow across centuries rather than between competing city-states. The communication systems you developed for coordinating resistance activities now serve as models for understanding how indigenous knowledge was preserved and transmitted through colonial periods that seem designed to eliminate non-European intellectual traditions entirely. Modern scholars recognize that the cultural persistence they're documenting required organizational capabilities that rival anything achieved by contemporary intelligence agencies. The calendar conspiracies you orchestrated to maintain religious authority have become case studies in how sophisticated mathematical knowledge can survive political suppression through careful integration with dominant cultural systems. Your astronomical calculations continue to impress modern scientists who discover that Maya eclipse predictions were more accurate than European methods available during the same historical periods. While your theological innovations demonstrate intellectual flexibility that enabled indigenous spiritual traditions to adapt without losing essential authenticity. The marriage alliances you negotiated to strengthen political networks created genetic and cultural patterns that modern anthropologists can still trace through contemporary Maya communities. Your dynastic strategies produced bloodlines whose descendants carry forward traditional knowledge while participating successfully in modern economic and educational systems, proving that cultural preservation and contemporary adaptation can complement rather than compete with each other. The drought management techniques you developed showcase environmental adaptation strategies that contemporary climate scientists recognize as remarkably sophisticated approaches to sustainable resource management. Your agricultural innovations, water conservation methods, and community resilience programs provide models for modern societies facing similar challenges from climate change and environmental degradation. Your approaches to managing competing religious factions offer insights that modern political leaders study for guidance in addressing cultural conflicts that threaten social stability. The theological diplomacy you practice demonstrates how diverse spiritual traditions can coexist within unified political systems when leadership combines genuine respect for different beliefs with practical strategies for preventing ideological conflict from escalating into destructive violence. The prisoner exchange networks you operated evolved into cultural preservation systems that maintained indigenous knowledge even under colonial suppression designed to eliminate traditional intellectual traditions. Your methods for converting enemies into allies provide contemporary examples of how political reconciliation can create stronger communities than simple military victory alone could achieve. The underground temple networks you established to protect sacred knowledge during colonial persecution have become symbols of cultural resistance that inspire modern indigenous rights movements throughout the Americas. Your preservation techniques demonstrate how essential knowledge can survive centuries of systematic suppression when communities combine technological innovation with dedicated commitment to maintaining cultural identity. The educational programs you developed for training cultural carriers in remote jungle sanctuaries created intellectual traditions that continue to influence Maya communities whose contemporary achievements in mathematics, astronomy, and environmental science reflect the high standards you established for preserving and advancing indigenous knowledge systems. Your greatest legacy lies not in the stone monuments that tourists photograph, but in the living intellectual traditions that contemporary Maya scholars continue to develop and refine. The mathematical innovations your people contributed to human knowledge provide foundations for ongoing scientific research, while your theological insights continue to offer spiritual guidance for people seeking authentic relationships with natural and supernatural forces. The archaeological evidence emerging from sites you helped create reveals that Maya civilization's classical achievements represented just one phase of a cultural tradition that continued to evolve and adapt throughout periods that historians once described as decline or collapse. Your survival strategies enabled intellectual traditions to persist and develop even when political independence was impossible, proving that cultural sophistication can survive and flourish regardless of changing political circumstances. Modern Maya communities whose members work as everything from NASA mathematicians to environmental protection advocates embody the educational principles you established for maintaining cultural identity while participating successfully in contemporary global society. Their achievements demonstrate that indigenous intellectual traditions can enhance rather than limit individual opportunities for success in modern careers. The preservation networks you created continue to function through cultural institutions, family traditions, and community practices that maintain Maya knowledge while adapting to contemporary circumstances. Museums, universities, and cultural centers throughout the Maya region now serve functions similar to the underground libraries you operated during colonial suppression, ensuring that traditional knowledge remains accessible to future generations. Your most profound achievement involved demonstrating that authentic cultural identity can survive and flourish even under extreme political pressure when communities combine flexibility with determination, innovation with tradition, and practical adaptation with spiritual authenticity. The survival strategies you developed provide models for how any culture can maintain essential identity while adapting to changed circumstances. The mathematical precision that characterized your astronomical calculations now influences computer algorithms used for space exploration, while your understanding of complex calendar systems provides insights for modern timekeeping technologies. Your theological innovations continue to offer spiritual guidance for people seeking authentic religious experiences that honor both traditional wisdom and contemporary knowledge. As archaeologists continue uncovering evidence of the sophisticated survival strategies you perfected, they're discovering that Maya civilization's greatest achievements may lie not in the classical monuments that capture popular imagination, but in the intellectual traditions that enabled your people to adapt, preserve, and continue developing their contributions to human knowledge despite centuries of political suppression and cultural pressure. The echoes in modern ruins carry forward a message that transcends any single historical period. Authentic cultural identity, combined with strategic adaptation, can enable human communities to survive and flourish regardless of whatever challenges the future might bring. Your legacy lives not in stone and earth, but in the continuing intellectual achievements of people whose survival strategies prove that wisdom, properly preserved and thoughtfully applied, represents humanity's greatest renewable resource. The cacao pods arrive from your personal plantation just as the royal treasury officials announced new taxes on temple holdings, and you realize that your survival now depends not just on religious authority and political maneuvering, but on economic diversification that transforms you from spiritual leader into merchant priest, managing complex business operations that fund your temple's independence while maintaining the appearance of otherworldly detachment from material concerns. Your agricultural investments, carefully disguised as religious offerings to ensure tax advantages, include not just cacao groves, but cotton fields whose textiles trade throughout Mesoamerica, obsidian quarries that supply cutting tools and weapons, and salt production facilities that generate the precious commodity essential for food preservation and long-distance trade. These business ventures, managed through a network of loyal intermediaries and temple-affiliated merchants, create revenue streams that make your institution less dependent on royal patronage and therefore less vulnerable to political changes. The mathematics of your diversified economy would impress modern financial advisors. Cacao futures contracts that guarantee steady income regardless of seasonal variations, textile production time to coincide with ceremonial demand peaks, obsidian trading relationships that provide both economic returns and strategic intelligence about military preparations in distant cities, and salt distribution networks that create diplomatic leverage through control of essential resources. Your ledgers, disguised as religious records, track profit margins, seasonal variations, and market trends with precision that rivals your astronomical calculations. Your merchant partnerships extend throughout the Mayan world and beyond, creating trade relationships that serve simultaneously as economic ventures, intelligence networks, and diplomatic channels. The traders who carry your goods also carry information about political developments, military movements, and religious innovations in distant cities, making your commercial operations an essential component of your strategic intelligence capabilities. These relationships, carefully cultivated through years of reliable business practices and fair dealing, provide early warning about threats and opportunities that affect your survival prospects. The royal treasury's demand for increased temple contributions forces you to reveal the extent of your economic activities, but your presentation frames these business operations as religious duties rather than personal enrichment. You explain that cacao cultivation honors the gods who created humanity from corn and chocolate. Textile production serves ceremonial needs throughout the region. Obsidian quarrying provides materials for sacred rituals, and salt trading ensures that religious festivals can properly preserve offerings for divine consumption. This theological justification, while somewhat creative, satisfies officials who prefer to collect taxes rather than investigate complex questions about the relationship between spiritual authority and economic necessity. Your younger priests, initially scandalized by the revelation that their spiritual leader operates extensive commercial enterprises, gradually understand that economic independence enables religious authority rather than compromising it. A temple that depends entirely on royal support serves royal interests first and divine will second, while a financially independent institution can maintain religious principles even when they conflict with political convenience. This lesson, learned through direct experience of treasury pressure and royal expectations, transforms their understanding of practical priesthood from naive idealism to sophisticated realism. The integration of commercial and religious activities requires careful scheduling that prevents contamination between sacred and secular functions. Your morning rituals precede business meetings. Astronomical calculations are completed before reviewing trade reports, and ceremonial obligations take precedence over commercial opportunities, maintaining the appearance and reality of spiritual priorities while ensuring that economic activities support rather than supplant religious authority. Historians still argue whether such compartmentalization represents authentic religious devotion or calculated performance designed to maintain credibility. But you know that survival requires both genuine faith and practical competence. Your trading relationships create unexpected diplomatic opportunities when merchants report that rival cities are experiencing economic difficulties that make them potentially receptive to alliance proposals. The cacao shortage affecting Calakmul's ceremonial calendar, cotton supply problems disrupting Caracol's textile production, and obsidian scarcity limiting Tikal's weapon manufacturing all represent potential leverage points where your economic resources could secure political advantages or prevent military conflicts that would threaten your city's stability. The expansion of your commercial operations into luxury goods, jade jewelry, quetzal feather ornaments, and elaborate ceremonial regalia serves both economic and political purposes by creating products that appeal to noble houses while reinforcing your position as intermediary between divine authority and earthly power. These items, blessed through religious ceremony before sale, carry spiritual significance that justifies premium pricing while creating customer loyalty based on belief rather than simple commercial satisfaction. Your financial success attracts attention from other temple complexes seeking to emulate your economic model, creating opportunities for religious franchising that extends your influence while generating additional revenue streams. These partnerships, structured as theological alliances with commercial components, allow you to share business practices and market intelligence while maintaining competitive advantages through selective information sharing and exclusive supplier relationships. The morning's accounting session, conducted in the pre-dawn hours before religious obligations begin, reveals that your diversified economic operations now generate sufficient revenue to maintain temple functions independently of royal support. A level of financial independence that represents both liberation from political pressure and increased vulnerability to economic targeting by enemies who recognize that attacking your commercial interests might prove more effective than direct military assault. Your transformation from purely religious leader to merchant priest represents broader changes throughout Mayan civilization as temples adapt to increasing political instability and economic complexity by developing independent resource bases that enable institutional survival regardless of dynastic changes, military defeats, or royal disfavor. This evolution, driven by practical necessity rather than theological innovation, demonstrates how religious authority adapts to changing circumstances while maintaining essential spiritual functions that justify continued social relevance and political protection. You crouch in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, watching as your most trusted acolyte returns from the borderlands with news that makes your blood run cold. The runner's obsidian dust tattoos glisten with sweat, and his eyes carry the haunted look of someone who's seen enemy war parties gathering just beyond the Cecropia groves. This is how survival begins for a Mayan priest. Not with grand ceremonies or golden chalices, but with whispered intelligence gathered by networks you've spent decades building. Your spy system stretches like spider silk across the Pedon region, invisible threads connecting market vendors, cacao traders, and itinerant shamans who carry more than just healing herbs in their traveling packs. These aren't the romanticized secret agents of modern thrillers, but ordinary people whose lives depend on knowing which city-state plans to raid which settlement next week. You've learned to read the subtle signals. When the jade merchant from Caracol suddenly stops visiting your markets, or when the Quetzal feather traders begin taking longer routes that avoid certain territories entirely. The smoke signals rise from the temple platforms like prayers, but you know better. Each column of copal incense carries coded messages that would make a contemporary cryptographer proud. 3 puffs followed by a steady stream means all clear from the north, while interrupted smoke accompanied by the cry of a howler monkey indicates enemy scouts have been spotted. Historians still argue whether these communication systems were as sophisticated as Spanish chroniclers claimed, but you've seen how quickly word travels when a rival priest king decides your city's tribute payments are insufficient. Your network operates on layers of redundancy that would impress modern intelligence agencies. The cacao bean counters who track trade routes also monitor troop movements. The midwives who travel between settlements carry information about which noble families are forming new alliances through strategic marriages. Even the children who gather wild honey from forest hives serve as your eyes and ears, trained to notice when strangers ask too many questions about temple schedules or ritual supplies. The most valuable intelligence comes from the scribes, those patient men who spend their days recording tribute lists and genealogies in books made from beaten fig bark. They're the ones who notice when a neighboring city suddenly increases its orders for obsidian spear points, or when diplomatic marriages are arranged with unusual haste. You've cultivated relationships with these record keepers across multiple city-states, offering them rare pigments for their manuscripts in exchange for copies of documents that reveal shifting political alliances. Your counterintelligence operations run equally deep. You plant false information about your city's military capabilities, spreading rumors through the very same trading networks that bring you real intelligence. Sometimes you'll have your agents accidentally let slip that your warrior priests have discovered new battle magic, or that your astronomical calculations have revealed the gods' displeasure with any city that dares attack during the upcoming Venus cycle. It's psychological warfare wrapped in religious mysticism, and it works because your enemies can never be entirely sure what's real prophecy and what's calculated misdirection. The physical infrastructure of your spy network requires constant maintenance. Hidden caches of supplies are buried along major trade routes, marked with symbols that look like random carvings to untrained eyes, but serve as resupply points for your agents. You maintain safe houses in neutral settlements, usually the homes of craftspeople who owe their prosperity to your city's protection. These aren't glamorous locations, just ordinary workshops where your people can rest, receive new instructions, and pass along gathered intelligence. Your most sensitive operations involve penetrating rival cities' religious hierarchies. This requires sending your own acolytes to study under enemy priest kings, a dangerous game that can take years to pay off. These deep cover agents must genuinely master their hosts' religious practices while maintaining secret loyalty to your cause. Some never return, whether from death, discovery, or simple conversion to their adopted city's beliefs. Others provide intelligence so valuable it can prevent wars or enable your allies to strike at precisely the right moment. The communication methods evolve with necessity. During the dry season, when smoke signals carry too far and risk interception, you switch to networks of mirrors that flash coded sunlight across jungle clearings. In the rainy months, Messages travel inside hollow jade ornaments worn by seemingly innocent pilgrims. Your agents develop their own jargon, referring to enemy troop movements as abundant harvests and military preparations as festival planning that allows them to discuss sensitive matters even in crowded marketplaces. Technology plays a crucial role in your operations. The same mathematical precision you use for calendar calculations helps optimize patrol schedules and predict enemy movement patterns. Your knowledge of astronomy isn't just for religious ceremonies. It helps coordinate nighttime operations when specific constellations provide natural timing signals that work across vast distances. You even use your understanding of seasonal bird migrations to establish meeting schedules that seem natural to outside observers. The human cost of maintaining these networks weighs heavily on your conscience during quiet moments between temple duties. Families are separated when their members serve as agents in distant cities. Young people disappear into dangerous assignments from which they may never return. The gold and jade you spend on bribes and equipment could feed hungry families during difficult harvests. Yet you know that without this intelligence apparatus, your entire city could fall to enemies who mistake diplomacy for weakness. Your greatest fear isn't discovery by rival priest kings, but betrayal from within your own network. The same people who risk their lives gathering intelligence for you could just as easily sell that information to your enemies if offered sufficient incentives. This is why you compartmentalize operations, ensuring that no single agent knows enough to compromise your entire system. It's also why you invest heavily in the families of your most trusted operatives, providing them with social status and economic security that money alone cannot buy. As dawn approaches and the howler monkeys begin their territorial calls, you review the night's intelligence reports one final time before the morning rituals begin. 3 cities show signs of forming a new alliance against your interests, but your agents have also identified weaknesses in their coordination that could be exploited. The spy network you've built doesn't guarantee your survival, but it gives you something equally valuable in this dangerous world: the ability to see trouble coming and respond before your enemies even know you're aware of their plans. You stand atop the highest observatory platform, calculating the precise moment when the jaguar of night will devour the sun. And you know this eclipse will either secure your power for the next generation or destroy everything you've built. The mathematics racing through your mind would impress modern astronomers. Complex calculations tracking Venus cycles, lunar nodes, and the subtle wobble of Earth's axis that your people discovered centuries before European scholars even suspected such phenomena existed. Your astronomical knowledge represents the ultimate weapon in Maya political warfare, more powerful than obsidian-tipped spears or jaguar skin armor. When you can predict exactly when the sun will disappear from the sky, you wield the kind of authority that transforms ordinary humans into living gods. But this power comes with deadly risks. Fail to predict an eclipse, or worse, predict one that doesn't occur, and rival priest kings will use your error to justify everything from tribute rebellions to outright invasion. The calendar conspiracy you're orchestrating began months ago, when your scribes first identified the approaching solar eclipse in their astronomical tables. These aren't simple charts like modern calendars, but intricate mathematical instruments that track multiple overlapping cycles simultaneously. The sacred 260-day calendar interweaves with the 365-day solar year, while longer cycles measuring Venus transits and eclipse possibilities extend thousands of years into past and future. Your people call these calculations the burden of time, and you understand why. Carrying this knowledge feels like balancing the weight of eternity on your shoulders. The political implications of your eclipse prediction ripple outward like circles in a cenote pool. Your primary rival, the priest king of a city-state 2 days march to the east, has been questioning your authority for months, claiming that recent crop failures prove the gods have withdrawn their favor from your bloodline. His agents spread rumors in regional markets, suggesting that your astronomical calculations are becoming unreliable and that perhaps it's time for new leadership in this corner of the Maya world. You've decided to use the coming eclipse as a definitive demonstration of divine support, but the execution requires political theater that would make Machiavelli proud. Rather than simply announcing the eclipse in advance, you're orchestrating a complex narrative where the sun's disappearance will appear to result from your intercession with the gods on behalf of your people. This requires careful timing, strategic misdirection, and acting skills that could earn you roles in any royal court. The preparation begins with subtle adjustments to your usual ritual schedule. You increase the frequency of bloodletting ceremonies, claiming that the gods have demanded greater sacrifice in exchange for their continued protection. Your acolytes spread word that you've been receiving disturbing visions during your meditative trances, images of cosmic battles between forces of light and darkness that threaten to spill over into the human realm. Historians still argue whether Maya priest-kings genuinely believed in their own divine connections. But you've learned that the line between performance and reality blurs when thousands of people depend on your spiritual authority. The astronomical calculations themselves represent generations of accumulated knowledge, passed down through bloodlines of priest astronomers who treated mathematical precision as a sacred trust. Your teachers taught you to track not just obvious cycles like lunar months and solar years, but subtle variations that occur over decades and centuries. The eclipse you're preparing to use in your political gambit is part of a cycle that repeats every 18 years and 11 days, a period your people call a ceremonies cycle, though they discovered this pattern independently of Greek astronomers who would later claim credit for the same mathematical insight. Your most delicate challenge involves managing the information flow surrounding your eclipse prediction. Too many people knowing in advance would undermine the dramatic impact you're planning, but too few allies prepared for the event could lead to panic that destroys your city's social fabric. You confide in your closest advisors while maintaining strict secrecy from the general population, creating an inner circle of co-conspirators who understand their roles in the coming performance. The rival priest-king unwittingly plays into your strategy by intensifying his criticism of your leadership as the eclipse date approaches. His mockery of your failed prophecies and declining powers creates exactly the public narrative you need. When the sun disappears precisely as you planned, his credibility will evaporate along with the solar disk. You even encourage some of his more vocal supporters, knowing that their skepticism will make your eventual vindication more dramatically satisfying. Your knowledge extends beyond simple eclipse prediction to sophisticated understanding of planetary movements that allows for even more impressive demonstrations of divine connection. Venus appears as both morning and evening star in cycles lasting 584 days, but your calculations track the longer pattern where these cycles align with solar years every 8 years. You use this knowledge to plan ceremonies that appear to summon celestial events, timing important announcements to coincide with Venus's heliacal rising or the first appearance of particular constellations after seasonal invisibility. The eclipse conspiracy also serves broader political purposes beyond defeating your immediate rival. By demonstrating your astronomical accuracy, you strengthen relationships with allied cities whose own priest-kings recognize and respect such sophisticated knowledge. Some of these allies lack the mathematical expertise to make their own eclipse predictions, making them dependent on your calculations for their own political theater. This creates networks of mutual obligation that extend your influence far beyond your city's immediate territory. The technical aspects of your eclipse prediction require instruments and calculations that showcase Maya mathematical sophistication. Your observatory contains precisely aligned sighting tubes that track celestial movements across years and decades. Stone markers positioned throughout your city serve as reference points for measuring solar angles and stellar positions. The mathematical tables your scribes maintain use positional notation systems, including the concept of zero, mathematical innovations that won't appear in European scholarship for centuries. Your greatest fear as the eclipse date approaches isn't astronomical error, but the possibility that weather conditions will obscure the event. Clouds blocking the sun during a total eclipse would be indistinguishable from natural overcast to most observers, potentially undermining your entire political strategy. You've prepared alternative explanations involving the gods' displeasure with human doubt, but you know such fallback narratives lack the dramatic power of a perfectly visible solar eclipse occurring exactly when you've predicted. As the morning of the eclipse arrives, you climb once again to your highest observatory platform, surrounded by the tools and calculations that represent centuries of accumulated astronomical knowledge. The rival priest king has arrived with his retinue, confident that your predicted solar disappearance will fail to materialize and provide final proof of your declining divine connection. He doesn't know that in precisely 4 hours and 17 minutes, the mathematical precision of Maya astronomy will demonstrate who truly speak for the gods in this corner of the world. You kneel in the sacred chamber where 3 different religious factions await your judgment on a theological dispute that could split your city apart. And you realize that managing competing interpretations of divine will require diplomatic skills that would challenge the most seasoned political negotiators. The air thrums with tension as representatives of the jaguar cult, the feathered serpent devotees, and the traditional ancestor worshippers present their arguments for why their particular vision of religious truth should guide your city's spiritual future. The feathered serpent politics you're navigating represent one of the most complex challenges facing any Maya priest king. Kukulkan, the plumed serpent deity your people adopted from northern influences, brings powerful religious concepts that can strengthen your authority, but his worship also threatens to overshadow traditional beliefs that have sustained your bloodline's legitimacy for generations. The theological balancing act you're performing would make Vatican diplomats nervous, as you must honor new spiritual insights while maintaining reverence for ancestral traditions that form the foundation of your political power. Your problems began when a group of zealous young priests returned from pilgrimage to Chichen Itza with revolutionary ideas about religious practice. They claim that Kukulkan demands fundamental changes in how your people approach sacrifice, governance, and relationships with other city-states. These aren't minor theological adjustments, but proposals that would transform the basic structure of Maya religious life. The pilgrims insist that traditional bloodletting rituals are insufficient, that Kukulkan requires grander ceremonies involving architectural innovations, new astronomical calculations, and diplomatic relationships with cities throughout Mesoamerica. The established jaguar cult, led by priests whose families have served your bloodline for generations, views these feathered serpent innovations as dangerous foreign contamination that threatens authentic Maya spiritual traditions. They argue that your ancestors achieved greatness by honoring the jaguar lords of the underworld, and that abandoning these proven relationships with divine forces will invite cosmic disaster. Their position has strong support among your city's warrior class, who associate their military success with jaguar spiritual protection and fear that theological changes might weaken their effectiveness in battle. Your third major faction consists of traditionalists who emphasize ancestor worship and the preservation of ancient bloodline rituals that connect your family directly to the gods who created the world. These conservatives don't necessarily oppose new religious ideas, but they insist that any theological innovations must be integrated carefully with existing practices rather than replacing them entirely. Their leader, an elderly priestess whose mathematical calculations rival your own, argues that religious change should evolve gradually across generations rather than being imposed through sudden revolutionary transformations. The political implications of this theological dispute extend far beyond your city's ceremonial life. The Feathered Serpent faction's emphasis on diplomatic relationships with distant cities appeals to merchant families who profit from long-distance trade, but threatens military leaders who prefer the aggressive independence associated with traditional jaguar cult values. The Ancestor Worship faction maintains strong connections with rural agricultural communities that form your city's economic foundation, but their conservative approach frustrates younger generations eager for spiritual innovations that address contemporary challenges. Your strategy for managing these competing factions requires careful attention to the symbolic language that different groups use to express their religious convictions. The feathered serpent devotees favor elaborate featherwork and architectural projects that demonstrate their god's association with sky and wind phenomena. The jaguar cult emphasizes underground ceremonial chambers and rituals involving jade ornaments that connect them with underworld spiritual forces. The traditionalists focus on genealogical recitations and bloodline ceremonies that reinforce your family's divine legitimacy through ancestral connections. You've learned to speak multiple theological languages simultaneously, adjusting your emphasis depending on which audience you're addressing. During mourning ceremonies attended primarily by feathered serpent supporters, you stress astronomical observations and architectural innovations that honor Kukulkan's celestial aspects. Afternoon rituals with strong jaguar cult participation feature bloodletting ceremonies and underground chamber activities that demonstrate respect for traditional underworld connections. Evening ancestor worship sessions focus on genealogical recitations and family bloodline ceremonies that reinforce your divine legitimacy through hereditary spiritual authority. The theological debates themselves showcase sophisticated intellectual traditions that would impress scholars in any culture. Arguments involve complex questions about the nature of divine authority, the relationship between earthly and celestial powers, and the proper methods for communicating with supernatural forces. Historians still argue whether Maya religious thinking was as philosophically sophisticated as these debates suggest, but you've witnessed discussions that rival anything produced by contemporary European theological academies. Your most delicate challenge involves preventing theological disagreements from escalating into violence that could destroy your city's social cohesion. Religious passion runs deep in Maya culture, and disputes about proper worship practices have triggered civil wars in other city-states. You've seen communities torn apart when competing priest factions convinced different noble families that their rivals were practicing heretical rituals that threatened cosmic stability. The solution you're implementing involves creating ceremonial spaces and ritual schedules that accommodate all three major factions without requiring any group to compromise their core theological convictions. This requires architectural innovations that provide separate but equally impressive venues for different types of worship, along with calendar arrangements that ensure each faction receives appropriate attention during their most important religious seasons. Your new ceremonial complex includes underground chambers that satisfy jaguar cult requirements for underworld connection, sky observation platforms that meet feathered serpent needs for celestial worship, and traditional ancestor shrines that maintain conservative faction support for bloodline-based spiritual authority. The construction project itself serves as a diplomatic tool, providing economic opportunities for craftspeople associated with different religious factions while demonstrating your commitment to honoring all authentic forms of Maya spiritual tradition. The political benefits of your theological diplomacy extend beyond immediate religious harmony to strengthen your city's position in regional power struggles. Other priest kings respect leaders who can maintain internal unity while adapting to changing spiritual currents. And your success in managing competing religious factions enhances your reputation as someone capable of providing stable leadership during uncertain times. Your greatest fear isn't that one faction will eventually dominate the others, but that external enemies might exploit religious divisions to weaken your city from within. Rival priest kings have been known to send agents who pose as religious pilgrims while actually working to intensify theological disputes that serve their political interests. You maintain careful surveillance of visiting religious teachers and traveling shamans, ensuring that legitimate spiritual exchange doesn't provide cover for political subversion. As you conclude today's theological mediation session, you reflect on how religious leadership in a Maya world requires balancing spiritual authenticity with political necessity. The competing factions filing out of your ceremonial chamber represent genuine differences in how your people understand their relationship with divine forces. But they also embody political interests that could either strengthen or destroy your authority, depending on how skillfully you manage their competing demands for religious recognition and ceremonial prominence. You watch your daughter practice bloodletting techniques with the eldest son of your city's most powerful noble family, knowing that this carefully arranged marriage tutorial represents more than religious instruction. It's the foundation of a political alliance that will determine your bloodline's survival for generations. The young man's concentration as he learns to pierce his tongue with obsidian thorns demonstrates his commitment not just to proper ritual practice, but to joining a family whose authority depends on maintaining divine connections that lesser nobles can never hope to achieve. The royal blood and priestly wisdom you're weaving together through strategic marriages creates dynasties that extend your influence far beyond what military conquest alone could accomplish. Your approach to family politics would make Renaissance Italian princes envious, as you carefully balance bloodline purity with the practical necessity of forming alliances that strengthen your city's position in an increasingly dangerous political landscape. Every wedding ceremony becomes a diplomatic summit. Every child's birth represents a potential future ruler whose loyalty must be secured through years of careful education and religious training. Your marriage strategies operate on multiple levels simultaneously. At the most basic level, you're creating kinship networks that connect your family with noble bloodlines in allied cities, establishing relationships that can prevent wars or provide crucial support during times of crisis. But you're also engaging in genetic politics, carefully tracking bloodline characteristics that your people believe influence spiritual authority and divine favor. The mathematical precision you apply to astronomical calculations extends to genealogical record-keeping that would impress modern geneticists. The selection process for suitable marriage partners involves intelligence gathering that rivals your spy networks in complexity and importance. You need to know not just the immediate political reliability of potential allied families, but their historical patterns of loyalty, their economic resources, their connections with priestly hierarchies in other cities, and most importantly, their track record for producing children who demonstrate the spiritual gifts necessary for religious leadership. This requires agents who can evaluate everything from a candidate's mathematical abilities to their performance in bloodletting ceremonies. Your daughter's education represents a crucial component of your dynastic strategy. She must master not only traditional female religious roles like weaving sacred textiles and preparing ceremonial foods, but also advanced mathematical concepts, astronomical observations, and political negotiation skills that will allow her to serve as an effective regent if circumstances require her to rule directly. The young noble she's tutoring will need similar comprehensive training, as your family's marriages create partnerships rather than simple subordination relationships. The religious training you provide to your children and their spouses involves secrets that are never shared outside the immediate family bloodline. These include mathematical formulas for calendar calculations that maintain your astronomical authority, meditation techniques that produce the visionary experiences your people expect from priest kings, and bloodletting methods that create impressive ceremonial displays without causing permanent injury. Each piece of knowledge becomes a family treasure that strengthens your descendants' claim to divine authority. Your marriage negotiations involve dowry arrangements that would challenge modern diplomatic protocols in their complexity. Beyond the obvious exchange of jade ornaments, featherwork, and cacao beans, you're trading access to trade routes, sharing astronomical knowledge, coordinating military support agreements, and establishing protocols for managing religious festivals that will involve both families' ceremonial obligations. The contracts your scribes prepare for these unions resemble international treaties more than simple wedding arrangements. The children produced by these strategic marriages face unique challenges that require careful management throughout their development. They must learn to navigate multiple loyalty systems, honoring their birth family's traditions while respecting their spouse's ancestral customs, serving their home city's interests while maintaining relationships with allied communities, and balancing personal ambitions with dynastic responsibilities that extend far beyond individual preferences. Your most successful marriage alliance involved your youngest son's union with a priest-king's daughter from a city 3 days march to the south. This relationship has provided early warning of military threats from that direction, access to trade routes that bypass hostile territories, and collaborative astronomical projects that have enhanced both cities' religious authority. The couple's children show promising aptitude for mathematical calculations and ceremonial performance, suggesting that the bloodline combination has produced the spiritual gifts necessary for future leadership. The training programs you've established for noble children from allied families create a generation of leaders who share common educational experiences and religious perspectives. These young people spend years studying together in your city's ceremonial centers, learning identical mathematical techniques, participating in the same bloodletting rituals, and developing personal relationships that will influence political decisions throughout their adult lives. Historians still argue whether Maya educational systems were as sophisticated as these programs suggest, but you've seen how shared learning experiences create bonds that transcend traditional city-state rivalries. Your approach to managing multiple marriages within extended family networks requires careful attention to potential conflicts that could emerge from competing loyalties or inheritance disputes. You maintain detailed genealogical records that track not just direct bloodline connections, but the complex web of obligations and alliances that result from generations of strategic marriages. This information helps you predict potential problems and arrange settlements before family disputes escalate into political crises. The religious dimensions of your marriage politics involve theological questions about the nature of divine authority and its transmission through bloodline inheritance. Different Maya cities maintain varying beliefs about whether spiritual gifts pass through maternal or paternal lines, whether divine favor can be strengthened through strategic breeding, and how religious authority should be distributed among multiple children from the same family. Your marriage strategies must accommodate these theological differences while advancing your family's political interests. Your greatest success story involves a grandson whose parents' marriage connected your bloodline with a family renowned for producing exceptional astronomers. The young man has demonstrated mathematical abilities that surpass even your own calculations, and his religious authority is enhanced by genealogical connections that link him to both traditional jaguar cult traditions and newer feathered serpent innovations. Political leaders from across the region seek his astronomical advice, creating influence networks that extend your family's authority far beyond your city's immediate territory. The emotional costs of your dynastic strategies weigh heavily during quiet moments between official ceremonies. Children separated from their birth families to strengthen political alliances. Young people whose personal preferences must yield to diplomatic necessities, and the constant pressure of maintaining family relationships that serve political functions rather than simple affection. Yet you know that in a world where political survival depends on building networks of mutual obligation, your marriage strategies represent the difference between your bloodline's continuation and its extinction. As you watch your daughter and her future husband master the intricacies of ritual bloodletting, you reflect on how their partnership will carry forward the accumulated wisdom and political connections that your family has built over generations. Their children will inherit not just noble bloodlines and religious authority, but a network of relationships that spans multiple cities and provides the foundation for whatever challenges the future might bring to Maya civilization. And so, as the last whispers of ancient wisdom fade into the gentle sounds of night settling over the jungle, you can finally rest knowing that the sophisticated survival strategies you spent lifetimes perfecting have created legacies that extend far beyond the political crises that once seemed so urgent and immediate. The bloodlines you protected through careful marriages continue to carry forward mathematical knowledge that enhances contemporary scientific research, while the underground networks you established for preserving cultural treasures have evolved into institutions that ensure Maya intellectual traditions remain vibrant and relevant for future generations. The spy systems you developed to monitor political threats have become archaeological methodologies that help modern scholars understand how indigenous cultures maintained essential identity while adapting to seemingly impossible circumstances, proving that the diplomatic skills you mastered for navigating ancient rivalries continue to provide insights for contemporary communities facing cultural pressures and political challenges that threaten their authentic traditions. Your greatest achievement wasn't preventing any particular political crisis or winning any specific ceremonial competition, but demonstrating that human wisdom, when combined with strategic thinking and genuine commitment to cultural preservation, can survive and flourish regardless of whatever historical storms might rage around the communities that choose to prioritize intellectual development and spiritual authenticity over simple material success or temporary political advantage. The mathematical precision that guided your astronomical calculations, the theological innovations that enabled diverse spiritual traditions to coexist peacefully, and the educational methods that produced generations of cultural carriers who could maintain indigenous knowledge while participating successfully in changing political circumstances. All of these achievements continue to influence contemporary communities whose daily lives reflect the high standards you established for combining practical adaptation with authentic cultural identity. As you drift peacefully into the eternal rest that awaits all leaders who successfully fulfill their responsibilities to both their immediate communities and the broader human family. You can take satisfaction in knowing that the echoes of your wisdom continue to resonate through modern ruins, where archaeologists discover evidence of survival strategies so sophisticated that they provide models for how any culture can maintain essential identity while navigating whatever challenges the uncertain future might bring to communities committed to preserving and advancing humanity's greatest intellectual and spiritual achievements. Sweet dreams, knowing that true wisdom, once properly preserved and thoughtfully transmitted, becomes immortal in ways that transcend any individual lifetime or particular historical circumstance, creating legacies that enhance human understanding for as long as people remain curious about the sophisticated strategies their ancestors developed for surviving and flourishing in an unpredictable world.